I made a mistake. I trusted my daughter completely. I handed her my faith like it was nothing, and she used it to destroy an innocent woman's life. That thought follows me everywhere now. Into the kitchen when I make my morning coffee. Into the bedroom when I reach for the empty side of the bed. Into the driveway when I see the house across the street and remember the morning my neighbor walked over and changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began, which was 14 months ago, on a Thursday afternoon in October, when my wife had her stroke. I had been out back, raking leaves. My wife had been inside watching her programs, the way she always did on Thursday afternoons. She had her tea, her blanket, her remote. That was her routine for 32 years of retirement. I came in through the back door with mud on my boots, and I found her on the floor beside the couch. The next 8 hours were the kind you don't remember clearly no matter how many times you try. Paramedics. A hallway that smelled like antiseptic. A doctor with a very calm voice telling me things I couldn't quite hold on to. My wife survived, but the stroke had taken something from her. Her left side was weak. Her speech came slowly, like she was reaching for words through fog. She needed help, real help. The kind of help a 67-year-old man with 2 replaced knees and a bad shoulder, could not provide alone. Our daughter had been living in Phoenix for 11 years. She flew in for the first week, slept in the guest room, made soups my wife couldn't properly eat, and cried in the hallway when she thought I couldn't hear her. I loved her for coming. But she had a life out there, a husband, a job. She couldn't stay. So I called the home health agency the hospital social worker had recommended. They sent someone to meet with us. Her name was Patricia, and she was 34 years old, working toward her registered nursing license while taking on in-home care clients to pay for school. She came with references I called personally, 3 families. Each one of them talked about her the same way, with the kind of quiet certainty that people use when they really mean what they're saying. Patricia started the first Monday of November. She came 5 days a week, 9 to 5. She helped my wife with her physical therapy exercises, with bathing, with medications, with meals cut into small pieces and served at the right temperature. She learned my wife's preferences within the first 2 weeks. No pepper on her eggs. The television volume at 32, not 33. Her cardigan laid out on the arm of the chair before she woke up, so she could reach it herself. That last part was Patricia's idea, she said, giving my wife small moments of independence, even tiny ones, was important for her dignity and her recovery. I had never thought of it that way. I was grateful. I was more than grateful. My wife began to improve. Slowly, but genuinely. She was smiling more. She was speaking in fuller sentences. She started asking for her crossword books again. The doctor at her 6-week follow-up said she was doing better than he had expected. I told him we had good help at home. He nodded and said that made all the difference. Those were the months I still look back on as the good months, even though my wife was sick, even though everything was hard. Patricia brought steadiness into a house that had lost it. She was professional but warm. She remembered things. She noticed things. When my wife seemed low on a particular Tuesday, Patricia suggested we call our grandchildren on video, just to hear their voices. She was right. It helped immediately. I should have seen what was coming. In hindsight, there were signs. But grief and exhaustion make you blind to things you would otherwise catch. Our daughter started coming back more frequently in January. Once a month, then twice. I thought it was love. I thought she was worried about her mother and wanted to be close. She would sit in the living room while Patricia worked, watching. At the time, I thought she was just being protective. A daughter keeping an eye on things. Completely natural. She started mentioning small things. Offhand. Casual. The way you say something when you want it to land without sounding like an accusation. She said, "Did I notice that my wife's pearl earrings weren't in the jewelry box anymore?" I checked. They were there. Our daughter said she must have been mistaken, but the way she said it left a residue. She said Patricia seemed to spend a lot of time in the kitchen when my wife was napping. I thought about it. Patricia always made lunch during that time. That was normal. But our daughter tilted her head slightly and said she just found it a little odd. She said she had read something online about home health aides and medication mismanagement. I told her, Patricia followed the medication log perfectly. Our daughter nodded and said she was sure that was true. She just wanted me to be aware. Each thing, by itself, was nothing. Together, they were building something. I didn't see that at the time. I was a tired man who trusted his daughter and wanted someone to help carry the worry. I didn't realize I was being handed a weight instead. In March, our daughter called me on a Sunday evening. Her voice was different. Lower, careful. She said she needed to tell me something she had been sitting on for a while because she didn't want to upset me. She said the previous Thursday, she had stopped by the house unexpectedly around noon while Patricia was there. She said she had stood in the hallway for a moment before saying anything, and she had heard Patricia on the phone. She said Patricia was talking about my wife's medications, about what she was taking and what the doses were. She said Patricia was giving that information to someone she didn't know. She said she couldn't be completely sure, but it sounded like Patricia might be providing information to someone who bought and sold prescription medications. I sat down. My daughter said she was probably wrong. She said she didn't want to make trouble. She said she felt terrible saying anything at all. But she was my daughter, and she loved us, and she couldn't stay quiet if there was even a small chance my wife was in danger. I asked her why she hadn't come to me sooner. She said she hadn't been sure. She said she had been watching Patricia more carefully since then. She said she had also noticed that the small envelope of cash I kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery runs had been short twice in the last month. I checked the drawer after we hung up. The envelope was lighter than I thought it should be. $40, maybe $50, less than I expected. I barely slept that night. I called the agency the next morning and told them I had concerns. I asked them to send a supervisor. The supervisor came that afternoon, and I told her what our daughter had said. I told her about the envelope. The supervisor thanked me and said they would look into it. Patricia arrived the following morning, not knowing any of this. She came in with her bag and her coat and said good morning to my wife, who reached out and patted Patricia's hand the way she had started doing. I watched them from the doorway and felt something twist in my chest. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself a good husband had to be careful. The agency called me 2 days later. They said they had reviewed Patricia's employment file, spoken to her, and found no formal basis for termination. But given the seriousness of my concerns, they would support my right to end the service agreement. They said if I believed a crime had occurred, I should contact the police. That is what our daughter told me to do. Contact the police, file a report. She said she could write down exactly what she had heard. She said she could describe the missing cash. She said it was the only responsible thing for my wife's safety. I filed the report. I told the officer what our daughter had told me. I listed the cash. I mentioned the medications. The officer was thorough. He took notes. He said they would follow up. Patricia was interviewed. Then she was charged. Not with the phone call, which could not be proven, but with theft, based on the missing cash, and on a statement our daughter gave saying she had personally witnessed Patricia taking money from the kitchen drawer during one of her visits. I told myself I had done the right thing. I told myself I would have never forgiven myself if something had happened to my wife, and I had stayed quiet. Patricia lost her job with the agency immediately. Because the charge involved a vulnerable adult, the state licensing board flagged her application. Her path to her nursing license stopped completely. She had to hire a lawyer. She spent 12 days in county jail before she was released on bail. Her mother helped her pay. My wife asked me where Patricia was. I told her Patricia had moved on to another client. My wife looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. She had always been better than me at reading the space between words. We hired a new caregiver through a different agency. She was competent. She did the job. My wife was polite to her, but the easy warmth that had grown with Patricia was gone. My wife went quieter in ways I tried not to think about. Our daughter visited more often through April and May. She seemed lighter than she had in years. I was glad she was spending more time with her mother. I told myself this terrible situation had at least brought our daughter back to us. My wife had a second, smaller stroke in May. She recovered faster this time, but she was more tired afterward, more withdrawn. Her doctor adjusted her medications. He mentioned, very carefully, that her previous medication levels had looked somewhat unusual at her last blood work. He said it was probably nothing, just variation in how her body processed things over time. He did not say anything more than that. I noted it and set it aside. One Tuesday morning in June, my neighbor knocked on my front door. He was a retired sheriff's deputy who had lived across the street from us for 19 years. We had a good relationship built mostly on waved hellos and the occasional conversation over the fence about the neighborhood or the weather or our respective health complaints. He was not a man who inserted himself into things. When he knocked on my door that morning with his jaw set and his hands clasped in front of him, I knew something was wrong. He told me he needed to show me something. He said he had been going back and forth about whether to come over, and he had finally decided he couldn't stay quiet. I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table. He had his laptop with him. He told me that his home security system covered not only his property but had a clear sight line to our driveway and front door because of the angle his house sat on the lot. He said he had never thought much about that until I had filed the police report about Patricia. He said he knew, because news traveled fast in a neighborhood this size, that I had accused my home health aide of stealing. He said something about that had bothered him. He hadn't been able to say exactly why at first. He pulled up his security footage. He had gone back through 5 months of recordings. He showed me the dates our daughter had identified as times when cash was missing from the kitchen drawer. The days our daughter had said she was not at the house. The days she had told police she was in Phoenix. My daughter's car was in my driveway on 2 of those exact dates. Not a similar car, not someone else's car, her plates. I knew them as well as I knew my own face. He clicked through more files. He showed me footage from a Thursday afternoon in February that our daughter had never mentioned to me or to anyone. Her car in the driveway, her letting herself in with the key I had given her when her mother first got sick. Staying for nearly 40 minutes. Leaving. Patricia had not been scheduled that day. It was one of Patricia's days off. The cash in the kitchen drawer had been short that same week. My neighbor said he had more. He pulled up footage from a date in late January. Patricia's car in the driveway, the regular schedule. Then, 2 hours after Patricia's car left, my daughter's car arriving. Staying 30 minutes. Leaving. The following Tuesday was when I had noticed the pearl earrings question. My neighbor closed the laptop carefully. He said he was sorry. He said he had sat on this for 3 weeks trying to decide if he was reading it wrong. He had shown it to a former colleague, a retired investigator he trusted, and they had both come to the same conclusion. He said, "I think your daughter has been in your house on days you didn't know about." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Then I thought about what the doctor had said, about the medication levels being unusual. I thought about the phone call my daughter had described. Patricia, on the phone, talking about my wife's medications. The call, my daughter said she had overheard. The call that had started all of this. I asked my neighbor if his footage went back further. He said it went back to November, when Patricia had started. I asked him if he could check a specific date. The Thursday in January, our daughter said she had stopped by unexpectedly and heard Patricia on the phone. He pulled up the file. My daughter's car was not in the driveway on that Thursday. Patricia's car was. The footage showed no one else arriving. No one standing in the hallway. My daughter had not been there. She had not overheard anything. I called my wife's doctor. I told him I had a question about those unusual medication levels he had mentioned in May. I told him I needed to know whether those levels could have been caused by someone adding small amounts of a medication to food or drink over a period of weeks. I told him I understood that was an alarming thing to ask. I told him I needed to know anyway. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would like me to come in. That appointment was the hardest hour of my life. The doctor said the pattern in my wife's blood work was consistent with gradual accumulation, meaning levels building over time rather than fluctuating. He said it was not consistent with standard dosing errors. He said, very carefully, that if someone wanted to accelerate a decline in a patient with my wife's condition, what he was describing would be one way to do it. I drove home with my hands locked on the steering wheel and my mind completely empty. My wife was in her chair when I came in. She looked up at me and tried to read my face. She said, "What happened?" Not a question. She knew me. I said, I made a terrible mistake. I called the police that evening. I told them everything. I told them about the security footage. I told them about the medication levels. I gave them my neighbor's name. I told them that the statement my daughter had given, the one that had put Patricia in jail, had been fabricated. I told them about the dates her car appeared on the footage on days she had told them she was in Phoenix. The detective I spoke to asked me several times if I was certain. He said what I was describing was serious. I told him I understood that. I told him I had never been more certain of anything, and I had never been more ashamed of anything at the same time. My daughter was arrested 6 days later. She was in Phoenix when the detective called her. She told him she had no idea what I was talking about. She said I had become confused and paranoid since my wife's stroke. She said she was worried about my mental state. The police pulled her financial records. She had gambling debts I had not known existed, significant ones. She had been borrowing money for over 2 years. She had maxed 2 credit cards and taken a personal loan she was behind on. The prosecutor later described the amounts as substantial enough to constitute motive. The medication angle took longer to establish. My wife's doctor submitted a formal report. Toxicology ran additional analyses. The results came back 3 weeks after my daughter's arrest. What was found in my wife's system was consistent with a blood pressure medication my wife was not prescribed, a medication my daughter had been prescribed under her own name for 4 years. A medication that, in accumulated doses, would be particularly dangerous for someone with my wife's cardiac history. I cannot write the word they used for what my daughter had done. I have read it in legal documents 3 times now, and each time my mind slides away from it like water off glass. Patricia had been in county jail for 12 days and then on bail for over 4 months when the charges against her were dropped. Her lawyer called her at 7 in the morning on a Thursday. She told me later she had been making oatmeal when her phone rang and she had to sit down on her kitchen floor when it was over. I went to see her. I had drafted what I wanted to say 7 different times on 7 different pieces of paper and thrown all 7 of them away. Nothing I wrote was adequate. Nothing came close. I drove to her apartment and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car. She opened the door. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then she stepped back and let me in. I told her everything. I did not spare myself in any of it. I told her that I had believed what I had wanted to believe because it was easier than looking harder. I told her that I had failed her in every way a person can fail another person. I told her that I had watched her care for my wife with patience and skill and genuine love, and I had thrown all of that aside because my daughter had handed me a version of events that let me feel like I was protecting my family. I told her that was not an excuse. It was an explanation, and a poor one. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did your wife know I was gone?" I told her yes, that my wife had asked for her. She closed her eyes. I told her about the legal steps the prosecutor was taking. I told her I had given a full statement, and that I had made clear to every person involved that the fault for what had happened to her lay entirely with me and with my daughter. Then I told her what I had arranged. I had spoken to my attorney. I had signed documents. I had sold the rental property I had owned for 12 years, a small house 2 towns over that I had been renting out since my own father died and left it to me. The proceeds were in a trust, and that trust had one beneficiary. I told Patricia the number. She looked at me for a long time. She said that wasn't necessary. I told her it was not nearly enough, but it was everything I had that was mine to give. I told her I had also contacted the state licensing board directly. I had submitted a formal statement of her complete innocence and a detailed account of what had actually occurred. Her nursing license application had been reinstated with a note on file clearing the record. I had spoken to 2 attorneys who specialized in wrongful professional discipline. One of them had taken her case at no charge. Patricia said she didn't know what to say. I told her she didn't have to say anything. I got up to leave. At the door, she said my name. I stopped. She said, "How is she doing?" She meant my wife. I told her my wife was still here, that she was fighting, that she asked about Patricia sometimes. Patricia nodded. She said, "Tell her I said hello." I told her I would. My daughter's trial was set for the following spring. She pleaded not guilty. She hired a defense attorney who suggested that the security footage was inconclusive and that the medication findings were explainable. The prosecutor had the toxicology reports, the financial records, the footage, and my own testimony. I sat in that courtroom and told the truth about every single thing. I had rehearsed none of it. I sat in the witness stand and answered every question plainly. My daughter looked at me from the defense table with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, something quieter than that. Something that looked almost like relief, as if some weight that had been building for a long time was finally, in the worst possible way, being set down. I do not know how to explain what it means to testify against your child. I know only that I owed the truth to my wife, to Patricia, to the court, and to the part of myself that still believed a man's choices define him more than his grief does. My daughter was convicted. The sentencing was 4 months later. I submitted a victim impact statement on my wife's behalf because my wife wanted her voice on the record even though speaking in public was still difficult for her. I read it aloud. My wife sat in the gallery and held her own hands in her lap and listened to her own words in my voice. And when I was finished, she gave one small nod. My daughter received a sentence that will keep her away for years. On the day it was announced, I sat in the car outside the courthouse and did not start the engine for a long time. A court officer I had spoken to several times over the previous months knocked on my window and asked if I was all right. I told him I was. I was not, but I was still there, and I had done what I had to do. Patricia came back to see my wife 2 months after the trial. It was a Saturday. Patricia brought flowers. My wife was in her chair by the window when I brought Patricia in, and when my wife looked up and saw her, she reached out her right hand, which was still her stronger hand, and Patricia walked over and took it and sat on the footstool beside the chair, and they stayed that way for a long time without speaking. I stood in the doorway of my own living room and watched my wife hold the hand of the woman I had wronged, and I understood something I had not fully understood before, that the ones who truly pay for a man's mistakes are never the man himself. It is always the people who were doing nothing wrong, the people who showed up, the people who cared. Patricia is finishing her nursing degree now. She has 1 semester left. She told me about it at the end of that Saturday visit, standing by the front door with her coat on, in the ordinary way of someone whose life is continuing forward. She said she had thought about quitting after everything. She said there had been weeks where she could not see the point. She said what got her through was something a professor had told her in her first semester, that the work was bigger than any one bad stretch of road. I told her I was proud of her. She told me that was kind. I watch the house across the street sometimes in the mornings when I am at the kitchen window with my coffee. My neighbor still waves when we see each other. Sometimes he walks over and we talk about the neighborhood and the weather and our respective health complaints, the same as we always did. But there is something else there now, something I do not have the right word for, the knowledge that someone saw the truth when I could not, and chose to cross the street and say something. I have thought many times about what would have happened if he had stayed home that morning, if he had decided it wasn't his business, if the angle of his house on the lot had been slightly different. I think about Emily. No, I mean Patricia. I think about Patricia in that county jail for 12 days. I think about her mother helping to post her bail. I think about her standing at a counter making oatmeal, not knowing that her phone was about to ring and change things back. I think about my wife in her chair, quieter than she used to be, reaching for her crossword book, asking where Patricia had gone. I think about my daughter, and I think about the debt she carried in silence, and the fear that debt must have grown into, and the terrible logic that fear can lead a person toward. I think about that without forgiving it. I have learned, slowly, that understanding and forgiveness are not the same thing, and that a man can hold both in his hands at once, without either one canceling the other out. I made a mistake. I believed every word. I let love for one person become a blindness that crushed another. I know who I was in that story. I know what I failed to do, and when I failed to do it. I carry that the way you carry anything that cannot be put down. Not lightly, but forward. My wife had her last follow-up with her doctor 2 weeks ago. He said her recovery had plateaued in a good place. He said she was managing well. He said, whatever is happening at home, keep doing it. What is happening at home is that we take it one day at a time, that we say the things we mean while we still can, that I do not let the weariness of being 67 years old and tired and sad become an excuse to stop paying attention to the people around me, and that on Thursday mornings, when the light comes in through the kitchen window at the right angle, and my wife calls out from the other room to tell me her coffee is getting cold, I stop what I am doing and I go to her. That is what I should have done all along. I just needed to learn it the hardest possible way.